Marlene Jensen lived a quiet life tucked deep in the windswept plains of Montana. Her house sat on the edge of town, a humble one-story cottage with peeling white paint, a creaky porch swing, and wind chimes that danced with every gust rolling in from the mountains. She liked things simple. Her days were predictable, even if lonely, teaching at the local elementary school, tending to her small vegetable garden, and spending evenings wrapped in a blanket watching old movies on VHS tapes. She was 52 and had no children. Never married. Not because she hadn't wanted those things, but because life just hadn't made room. People in town described her as kind-hearted, but private. She wasn't exactly shy, just reserved. The kind of woman who remembered your birthday and brought soup when someone died, but didn't say much about her own pain. And there was pain. A quiet, hollow kind that settled in your chest like cold air in winter. There were photos on her mantle, sun-bleached and dust-covered. One showed her and her younger sister, Linda, as teenagers. They were smiling, arms slung over each other's shoulders. But they hadn't spoken in years. The silence between them had started as a crack and widened with time until it felt like a canyon. Drugs, bad choices, custody battles, Linda had been swallowed up by a life Marlene had tried hard to avoid. On a Tuesday morning in late October, everything shifted. The kind of morning where the sky looked too big and the wind bit sharper than it should. Marlene was grading spelling quizzes when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail. Miss Jensen. The voice was professional. Firm, but soft around the edges. This is social services in Billings. I'm afraid there's been an accident. Marlene's pen froze. Accident? It's about your sister, Linda. A pause. A chill. Her heart didn't race, it simply stopped, then slowly restarted, like an engine in the cold. She passed away yesterday, the voice continued. A car crash. We're contacting next of kin. Marlene swallowed. It felt like someone had pressed the world's weight into her chest. Linda was gone. The woman who'd lived fast, disappeared often, and whose life had become a trail of broken promises, gone in an instant. I see. The voice hesitated. She had 4 children in her custody. Ages 5 to 12. We're trying to locate family placement before the courts intervene. The room went silent. The wind knocked against the windows like a warning. 4 children. They're all native, the woman added, gently. Their father's family is, out of the picture. The tribe has limited resources right now. I'm sorry to put this on you, but, are you able to take them in? Even temporarily? Marlene stared out the window. The vast sky seemed to stretch into forever. She hadn't spoken to Linda in 7 years. She didn't even know the children's names. She could have said no. Every logical part of her screamed say no. You're not prepared. You don't know them. You don't know their world. You're 52, for God's sake. Instead, she heard herself say, yes. I'll do it. That night, she didn't sleep. The silence of the house, once comforting, now felt suffocating. She turned off the TV halfway through a sitcom rerun. Her cat paced nervously. She stared at the spare bedroom, filled with storage bins and unused blankets. 4 kids. 4 lives. She made space. Cleaned rooms. Cried once, quietly, in the kitchen when she realized she didn't even own 4 matching toothbrushes. She sat at the table and wrote down their names from memory, trying to piece together a family tree: Talia, Jonah, Micah, Rose. She practiced saying them out loud. The next day, they arrived. A social worker's white van pulled up slowly in the driveway. The children climbed out one by one, holding battered backpacks and a silence that screamed louder than words. Talia, the oldest, held the youngest's hand. She was tall for 12, with thick black hair and watchful eyes that didn't flinch when they met Marlene's. Jonah, 10, stood with slouched shoulders and eyes red from crying. Micah was 8, quiet, trailing behind like a shadow. And Rose, little Rose, just 5 years old, clutched a feather in her hand and stared at the ground like it might disappear. Marlene stood on the porch, heart in her throat. She didn't know how to greet them. Hug them? Shake their hands? Say, "I'm sorry." So she just opened the door. "Come inside," she said gently. "I made grilled cheese." They didn't answer. They walked in slowly, like entering someone else's dream. That first night, no one spoke much. Talia sat at the kitchen table, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Jonah played with the cat, whispering words Marlene couldn't hear. Micah refused dinner, curled on the couch and stared at the ceiling. Rose fell asleep in a chair with her thumb in her mouth. Marlene cleaned the dishes alone. In the silence, she noticed the wind had calmed. Or maybe it had just learned to wait. In the guest bedroom, she laid out fresh towels and mismatched pajamas. "These might be too big," she mumbled. No one responded. She peeked in later that night. Talia was still awake, staring at the ceiling. Marlene hovered in the doorway. "Good night." Talia didn't answer. Marlene whispered, more to herself than anyone, "I know I'm not her. But I'll try." Outside, the stars blanketed the prairie like tiny prayers. And inside that small, fragile home, something ancient had started to stir, not in words, but in presence. Not yet love. But a beginning. The morning after they arrived, the house felt heavier, like it was holding its breath. Marlene woke before the sun, nerves twitching in her chest, her body still unsure of this new role she had stepped into. She stood in the hallway in her flannel robe, listening to the soft shuffle of feet, the murmur of whispering voices, the creak of floorboards that hadn't complained in years. She brewed coffee with hands that trembled. As the scent filled the kitchen, she placed bowls and spoons on the table, unsure if any of the children even liked cereal. She'd picked up 3 different kinds at the grocery store, hoping one would land. Talia was the first to enter. She moved with purpose, already dressed in black jeans and a faded hoodie, her hair pulled into a tight braid. Her expression hadn't softened, eyes sharp, mouth a sealed line. She didn't say good morning. Jonah and Micah followed, dragging their feet. Micah still wouldn't meet Marlene's eyes, while Jonah's gaze was calculating, measuring her, as if trying to decide whether she was a threat, a joke, or just another adult who'd leave. Little Rose came last, barefoot, holding that same feather she'd arrived with. She didn't speak, but she climbed into a chair and hugged her knees, watching the others like a deer watches the wind. Marlene smiled gently. "I wasn't sure what kind you liked, so I got Fruity Pebbles, Cheerios, and Corn Flakes. You can pick." Silence. Then, a quiet voice from Jonah, "We usually had oatmeal. With brown sugar." Marlene blinked. "I can do that. Give me 10 minutes. She moved quickly, grateful for something to do. As she stirred the oats, she realized just how unprepared she was. These kids didn't know her. And she didn't know them. She didn't know their routines, their stories, their needs, their nightmares. All she had was a kitchen, a bit of kindness, and a gnawing sense that everything was about to unravel. Later that day, the social worker returned with a mountain of paperwork. Marlene sat at the table as the kids lingered nearby, ears tilted like little foxes trying not to eavesdrop while hearing every word. "Temporary guardianship," the woman explained. "This will keep them out of foster care while we work on a long-term plan." "Does that mean they'll stay?" Marlene asked, uncertain if the question was hope or fear. "For now," the social worker replied gently. "But it depends on tribal involvement, background checks, housing inspection, the usual bureaucracy. The children are members of the Crow Nation. That means there are sovereign legal processes involved. Marlene nodded. She didn't fully understand, but she knew enough to know that the path ahead wouldn't be straight. They deserve to be with family, she said quietly. The woman smiled. They deserve to be safe. If you're willing to learn, to listen, and to honor who they are, then maybe this is where they belong. That night, Marlene sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the ceiling. Her chest ached, not from grief, exactly, but from uncertainty. What if she wasn't enough? What if her love, her care, her effort, what if none of it could heal what they'd lost? She thought about Linda. The wild younger sister who'd once danced barefoot in thunderstorms, who'd laughed too loud and lived too fast. Marlene had spent years trying to keep her distance, protect herself from the heartbreak of watching someone spiral. But now Linda was gone, and her children were here. Living echoes of a woman both loved and mourned. The next morning, Marlene tried something different. She sat at the breakfast table and began to talk, not to them, but about herself. I wasn't always good at family, she said, pouring syrup over pancakes. I messed up with my sister. I stayed away when maybe I should have stayed close. But I want to try again. I want to be here now. For you. The kids didn't respond immediately. But Rose reached for a pancake. Jonah looked up. Micah glanced sideways. And Talia, she didn't leave the table. That afternoon, Marlene brought out board games. At first, no one showed interest. Then Jonah picked up Sorry, and sat cross-legged on the floor. Micah joined silently. Rose nestled into Marlene's side. Talia stood in the doorway, arms folded. Want to play? Marlene asked. Talia shrugged. Don't like board games. That's okay. You can watch. Or not. She didn't say anything, but she didn't leave either. She watched from the shadows as her siblings smiled, even if only for a moment. That night, Marlene read a book aloud in the living room. Island of the Blue Dolphins. Her voice trembled at first. Then steadied. Micah fell asleep against a pillow. Jonah leaned in closer. Rose curled around Marlene's arm, feather clutched tight. Talia sat in the corner with headphones, pretending not to listen. But Marlene saw the way her jaw softened. The way her body slowly uncoiled, just a little. Over the next few days, they found a rhythm. Not smooth. Not easy. But real. There were tantrums. Silence. Screaming in the night. Talia once slammed a door so hard it cracked. Jonah broke a glass in frustration. Micah wet the bed and cried for hours. Rose didn't speak a word, not even to her siblings. But there were also small mercies. Shared smiles. A game of tag in the backyard. A crayon drawing left on the fridge that said, "Thank you," in crooked letters. Marlene began to understand, this wasn't just about providing food and shelter. It was about rebuilding trust from ashes. About showing up, even when uninvited. About listening more than fixing. And about holding space for grief that didn't have words yet. One night, as Marlene was washing dishes, Talia stood silently behind her. She didn't speak for a long time. Then, in a low voice, she asked, "Why'd you say yes?" Marlene turned, drying her hands. "Because I couldn't say no." Talia narrowed her eyes. "You didn't even know us." "I know what it's like to feel alone," Marlene said softly. "And I knew I could try. Maybe that's enough to start." Talia didn't answer. But she didn't walk away either. Outside, the stars began to shine, bright, cold, and quiet. Inside, 5 people sat beneath a roof that had once held silence but was now slowly learning how to carry the sound of healing. It was the 4th week when Marlene realized the children didn't just carry grief, they carried history. Not the kind you read in textbooks, but the kind woven into bone, passed down like a sacred whisper. It lingered in their silence, their dreams, and even their play. When she asked Jonah about his favorite game, he answered without looking up, "I don't play anymore. Not since the fire." There had been no fire. Not recently. But Marlene didn't ask for clarification. She was beginning to learn that their truths were layered, some literal, some metaphorical, all of them real. They still didn't call her anything. Not Miss Marlene. Not Auntie. Not Mom. Sometimes she wondered if they'd ever speak her name at all. One morning, after a particularly restless night filled with sobs from Micah's room, Marlene found herself crying over a sink full of dirty breakfast dishes. Not loudly. Just quiet tears, falling unnoticed, until Talia walked in and froze. She stared for a long second, unsure of what she was seeing. "Are you okay?" she asked stiffly. Marlene wiped her face with a dish towel. "Just tired." Talia didn't respond, but she didn't leave either. Instead, she grabbed a plate from the counter and began to scrub. It was the first time she'd willingly helped with chores. Small gestures like that became Marlene's milestones. A shared glance. A question asked. A half smile. Each one chipped away at the invisible wall between them. But as things improved inside the house, complications bloomed outside. It started with a call from the school. Jonah had gotten into a fight with a classmate who called him a half-breed. The teacher's voice on the line was tight with discomfort, offering a vague apology but mostly concerned with disciplinary measures. Marlene clenched the phone with a white-knuckled grip. "He was defending himself," she said firmly. "Still," the teacher replied, "we can't allow violence." Marlene drove to the school that afternoon, heart pounding. She found Jonah sitting alone in the office, arms crossed, face unreadable. "What happened?" she asked. Jonah looked away. "He said we weren't real Indians. That you were stealing us." The words hit like a fist to the gut. Marlene's breath caught. "And what did you say?" "I punched him." She knelt in front of him. "You can't solve pain with more pain. But I'm proud you stood up for yourself. And for us." He looked at her then, for the first time in a way that felt like trust beginning to bloom. That night, Marlene lay awake wondering what it meant to raise children who straddled two worlds, tribal and white, broken and healing, invisible and fiercely seen. Her own upbringing hadn't prepared her for this. No parenting book could. There were truths here too big for instruction manuals. The next challenge came in a letter. Folded neatly and stamped with a government seal. It was a summons. The tribal court would hold a hearing to review the children's placement. They were, by law and blood, citizens of the Crow Nation. Their care could not be decided solely by the state. Marlene read the letter twice, heart sinking. This wasn't a custody battle in the traditional sense. This was about sovereignty. About ancestral rights. About whether a white woman, regardless of her love or intentions, could truly be trusted with indigenous children. She called the number listed. A young legal aide answered. "I want to do right by them," Marlene said. "But I don't know what that means yet." The voice on the other end softened. "Then come to the hearing. Bring them. Speak from your heart. But understand, it may not be up to you." In the weeks leading up to the court date, Marlene began reading late into the night. Books on tribal sovereignty. The Indian Child Welfare Act. The legacy of boarding schools. She learned about the long, brutal history of Native children removed from their families, their cultures stripped, their languages silenced. She read until her eyes blurred and her chest ached. One night, she sat the children down at the kitchen table. "There's going to be a hearing," she said gently. "People will ask questions about where you should live. Who should raise you?" Micah looked afraid. Jonah looked angry. Rose just clutched her feather tighter. Talia stared at her, unblinking. Are they going to take us away? Marlene's voice cracked. I don't know. But I'll fight for you. No matter what. Talia nodded once, slow and solemn. Good. Because we're not going anywhere without each other. At the hearing, the courtroom was small, just a few rows of benches, a tribal judge, and a handful of community members. The children sat beside Marlene, hands tightly linked. Talia refused to look away from the judge's eyes. A tribal elder spoke first. His voice was deep and even, weathered like stone and thunder. We must protect our children. That is our law. That is our medicine. Then Marlene stood. Her voice shook at first, but it steadied as she spoke. I didn't grow up knowing your stories, your language, or your ceremonies. I can't pretend to replace the people they've lost. But I love these children. I feed them. I sing to them. I hold them when they cry. I learn their names in your tongue. I ask questions. I listen. I know I'm not their blood. But I'm here. The judge nodded solemnly. Then he turned to the children. Talia rose without prompting. She tries. That's more than most ever did. She doesn't just tell us what to do. She listens. That's our way too. A silence fell like snow. Slow. Soft. Heavy with meaning. The judge leaned forward. Then for now, he said, you may remain with her. But this is not a final chapter. It is a beginning. You are part of two nations now. Walk both roads with respect. As they left the building, the sun broke through heavy clouds. Marlene exhaled for the first time in hours. She felt a small hand slip into hers. Rose looked up, eyes wide. Her voice, just a whisper, said, I had a dream last night. My mom was smiling. She told me to stay. Marlene knelt down, her eyes brimming. Did she say anything else? Rose nodded. She said, you're safe now. And for the first time, Marlene believed it might be true. Summer arrived slowly, like a song remembered from childhood. The Montana skies stretched endlessly above them, each sunrise a soft promise, each sunset a quiet prayer. With school out, the house was no longer bound by schedules and bells. Mornings turned into lazy pancakes and laughter echoing through screen doors. Afternoons spilled into the backyard, where grass-stained knees and bare feet told stories older than words. But inside this growing rhythm, there remained a current of uncertainty. No one forgot what had brought them together. Trauma doesn't disappear, it finds quieter ways to speak. One morning, while folding laundry, Marlene found a small sketch tucked inside Jonah's pants pocket. It was pencil on notebook paper, crumpled and worn. The drawing showed a house with 5 stick figures standing out front, Marlene in the middle, the kids around her. Above them, written in block letters, U.S. She placed the sketch gently on her nightstand and cried. That same week, Talia asked to go to the library. Marlene drove her there without question. Inside, she watched from a distance as the teenager wandered through the history section. She ran her fingers over spines of books on Native American resistance, language reclamation, and traditional medicine. Later, on the drive home, Talia broke the silence. My mom used to tell stories, she said. Old ones. About coyote and crow and the spirit trees. I don't remember all of them. Marlene kept her hands on the wheel, but her voice was soft. Maybe we could learn them together. Talia stared out the window. Maybe. That was all. But it was enough. They started visiting the tribal center every other week. Marlene introduced herself to an elder named Ramona, who wore long braids streaked with gray and had a voice that wrapped around you like wool. She offered to teach the children some absolute phrases and stories, only if they wanted to learn. Jonah and Micah were eager. Rose came too, silent as always, but attentive. Talia hovered at first, aloof, skeptical. Then one day, she joined a drumming circle without being asked. Afterward, Marlene sat beside Ramona on a wooden bench while the kids played under the cottonwoods. "They're starting to come home," Ramona said. "They're not going back to their reservation," Marlene replied carefully. "Maybe not physically," Ramona said. "But their spirit can still walk there." Marlene nodded. "I just want to help them carry it." Ramona smiled. "Then you already are." Back at the house, new routines took root. Talia began cooking dinner once a week. Fry bread and stew. Sometimes deer meat if Marlene could find it. She worked silently, focused. But on those nights, everyone cleaned their plates. Jonah found an old Polaroid camera at a garage sale and started documenting everything: meals, sunrises, muddy feet, sleeping pets. He taped the pictures to the hallway wall. "This is our story now," he said. Micah became fascinated by birds. Every morning, he sat at the window with binoculars and a field guide from the library, whispering names to himself. Chickadee. Magpie. Red-tailed hawk. And Rose. Rose began to hum. Just little melodies, fragments of old lullabies. Marlene never asked what they meant. She just listened. One Sunday, as they were walking back from the community center, Marlene asked the children to tell her something they missed. Jonah said, "The way Mom would sing to us when we were sick." Micah said, "Her necklace. The one with the turquoise stone." Talia hesitated. "I missed the way she fought for us. Even when she was broken." Rose didn't speak, but she pulled out a folded piece of paper from her tiny backpack. On it was a simple drawing, a heart surrounded by feathers. Later that night, Marlene sat in her room, holding Linda's old photo in her hands. Her sister had made so many mistakes. She had hurt the people she loved. But she had loved them fiercely. "You didn't get to stay," Marlene whispered. "But I'm here now. And I'll do it right." The next day, she called Ramona again. "I want to host a naming ceremony," she said. "For all of us." Ramona was quiet for a beat. Then, "Are you sure?" "Yes. I don't want to erase where they come from. I want to honor it. And I want them to see they're part of something now. Something sacred." It took weeks of preparation, gathering materials, seeking permission from tribal leaders, learning the songs. Marlene felt out of place at times, like she was standing barefoot on someone else's land. But every time doubt crept in, Ramona's voice reminded her, "It's not about being perfect. It's about being present." The ceremony was held under a great cottonwood by the river. Friends from the community came. Children dressed in ribbon shirts and skirts. Elders brought drums, gifts, prayers. One by one, each child was called forward. Talia's name meant, "She who watches the fire without fear." Jonah's, "One who gathers the light." Micah's, "Heart of the Sparrow." Rose's name, whispered like a blessing, "Silent song of mourning." Then, to Marlene's surprise, the elder turned to her. "And this woman," he said, "who took them into her arms when the wind threatened to scatter them, she shall be called, Mother who listens." Marlene blinked back tears. She hadn't come for a title. She hadn't expected acceptance. But in that moment, surrounded by river and drumbeat and sacred fire, she felt something click into place. Not just belonging. But becoming. That night, after everyone had gone home and the embers were dim, Rose tugged on Marlene's sleeve. "Can I sleep in your room tonight?" she whispered. Marlene nodded and lifted her into bed. As Rose curled into her side, Marlene stroked her hair and whispered, "You're safe now." And for the first time in months, sleep came easy. Autumn crept in with golden leaves and shorter days, and with it came a different kind of stillness, one not marked by fear or grief, but by settling. The children had started calling her Mama Marlene, quietly at first, like testing the edge of a cliff before stepping forward. When Rose said it aloud one morning while reaching for her cereal, Marlene almost dropped the milk. "Do you want me to say something else?" Rose asked, blinking. "No," Marlene said, wiping her eyes. "No, sweet girl. That name is perfect." The house, once filled with cautious footsteps and wordless glances, had become a home. Not just a place to sleep, but a place to exhale. Still, healing is not linear. One late October evening, Micah had a meltdown, his first in months. He screamed until his throat was raw, cried until his body shook, kicked at his door when Marlene tried to enter. No one knew what triggered it, but something inside him cracked open, and all the ghosts rushed in. Marlene didn't yell. She didn't walk away. She sat outside his door and waited, humming softly, the same lullaby his mother used to sing. Finally, when the sobs turned to sniffles, he opened the door and collapsed into her lap. "I'm scared I'll forget her," he whispered. "I forget her laugh sometimes." "Oh, baby," Marlene murmured, pressing her cheek to his hair. "Then we'll remember her together." They began creating a memory box that weekend. Each child placed something inside. Talia wrote a poem in Absolute. Jonah added one of his Polaroids, the one of them all on the porch. Micah contributed a carved wooden feather he'd whittled in school. And Rose placed a single, smooth stone. "From the river where we said her name," she explained. Marlene added a letter, one she had written to Linda months earlier but never mailed. In it, she told her sister how sorry she was for not seeing the pain sooner, for not stepping in faster. She ended the letter with, "You gave them life. I will give them everything else." The memory box lived on the mantel from then on, a small altar to the past and a bridge into the future. As the days grew colder, Marlene found herself wondering more and more about what the children would need, not just now, but later. How could she equip them for a world that would challenge their identities, question their place, and sometimes, try to make them choose sides? She scheduled a meeting with the tribal council. This time, she didn't come asking for permission, but for partnership. "They're going to grow up walking between two cultures," she told them. "I can't teach them everything. But I want to help them stay rooted." The council listened. And this time, they offered more than approval, they offered guidance. A mentorship program was arranged. The children would be paired with tribal mentors who could teach them language, customs, stories, and history from the inside. Not just heritage, Ramona said. But inheritance. Jonah was paired with a local photographer who taught him how to blend traditional storytelling with modern visual art. Talia began shadowing a community health worker who focused on indigenous women's wellness. Micah joined a group that studied native birds and animal spirits in cultural lore. Rose, still quiet, spent afternoons in the tribal library, gently coaxed into reading aloud by a patient elder named Elsie. Each of them, in their own way, began to thrive. One day, Talia asked Marlene if she could invite friends over for a sleepover. "Real friends," she said. "Ones who know who I am and don't ask weird questions." The house filled with teenage voices that night, laughter, music, the clatter of pizza boxes. Marlene stood at the kitchen door, smiling to herself. This wasn't just healing. This was growing. Thanksgiving came, and Marlene wasn't sure what to do. She'd never given the holiday much thought, but now, surrounded by children whose ancestors had survived centuries of erasure, she felt conflicted. So she sat them down. "I know this holiday doesn't feel good to everyone," she said. "But maybe we can make it ours. A time to celebrate how we've made a family. Not to forget the past, but to honor it." Talia nodded slowly. "Let's call it Remembering Day. For her. For all of them." That year, they made their own traditions. They cooked corn soup and wild rice. They lit a candle for Linda. They read a crow story about the first woman who turned into a star. And when they sat at the table, no one said grace. Instead, each person took turns saying what they were thankful for. Micah said, "That I feel safe now." Jonah said, "That I have brothers and sisters." Rose whispered, "That you stayed." And Talia, her voice clear and strong, said, "That she fought for us." Marlene looked around at the table, at the faces she now knew better than her own reflection, and found herself overwhelmed. "Thank you for letting me love you," she said. "Thank you for becoming mine." Later that night, long after the dishes were washed and the fire burned low, Marlene stepped out into the crisp November air. Above her, stars blinked in silent rhythm. She whispered a prayer she hadn't known she remembered. For the ones who came before. For the ones still finding their way. And for the ones I've been trusted to hold. Behind her, the laughter of children spilled through the door like music. And for the first time in years, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Winter in Montana arrived not just with snow, but with silence, the kind that blankets everything, both seen and unseen. The wind whispered through the trees like an ancient voice, and in the quiet, deeper truths began to surface. Marlene always felt something sacred in the stillness of winter. It reminded her of the moments between heartbeats, where life holds its breath. But this winter was different. It was the first she'd spend not just caring for children, but truly mothering them, through storms both outside and within. The snow came early, and with it, a deep chill. Yet inside the house, there was warmth. Jonah strung paper snowflakes across the windows. Talia filled the rooms with cinnamon and cedar. Micah insisted on feeding the birds, scattering seed on the porch like a ritual. Rose began collecting the tiniest pine cones, arranging them in bowls like offerings. They built a routine around the rhythm of cold days and long nights. Books read by firelight. Slow stews simmering on the stove. Songs sung in hushed voices before bed. There was comfort in the repetition, like their own sacred liturgy. But as the holidays approached, a shadow began to fall. Jonah's school counselor called one morning. He'd gotten into a fight, nothing too serious, but enough to raise concerns. Marlene picked him up early and drove him home in silence. It wasn't until they were sitting on the couch, coats still on, that he spoke. "They called me a dirty half-breed," he said. "Said I don't belong anywhere." Marlene's heart broke in slow motion. She wanted to scream. Instead, she pulled him into her arms. "You belong here," she said. "You belong to your people. You belong to me. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." "I don't look like them," he mumbled. "I don't even look like you." "Then we'll teach them to see with better eyes," she said. That night, they lit a candle, not for celebration, but for strength. Marlene stood behind Jonah as he stared into the flame, his face reflected in the window. "I don't want to forget who I am," he said. "You won't," she promised. "Not as long as I'm breathing." The next day, she called the school and scheduled a cultural education day. With Ramona's help, she organized a small presentation on Native history and resilience. It was nothing fancy, just stories, photos, songs. But it changed something. A few kids asked questions. One teacher cried. Jonah didn't say much afterward, but he held his head higher. It was the beginning of something Marlene hadn't expected, advocacy. Over the next few weeks, she spoke at 2 school board meetings. She worked with tribal liaisons to propose inclusive curriculum changes. She didn't see herself as a warrior. She didn't wear feathers or chant slogans. But she showed up. Every time. With truth, with empathy, and with love. "I'm not trying to speak for them," she told one skeptical administrator. "I'm just trying to clear the path so they can speak for themselves." Meanwhile, the children continued growing in their own quiet revolutions. Talia cut her hair, short and sharp, like her grandmother once wore it. She said it felt like shedding skin. I want to look how I feel, she explained. Micah wrote a poem about ravens and resilience. His teacher submitted it to a national contest. It won second place. Rose painted a picture of a buffalo walking through snow, a child asleep on its back. When Marlene asked about it, Rose just said, "That's us." Even Marlene felt herself changing. She no longer saw her reflection as someone who had merely stepped up or done the right thing. She saw a woman transformed by love, a love that demanded not just presence, but sacrifice and faith. Then, just before Christmas, a letter arrived. Official notice. The adoption had gone through. The children were now legally hers. The envelope trembled in her hands as she opened it. Legal words, impersonal and clean. But behind every line was blood, memory, and heartache. She called them into the living room, her voice barely steady. "It's done," she said. "You're mine. For good." The room was silent. Then Jonah jumped up and hugged her so tightly she gasped. Micah started crying. Talia smiled, just slightly. "I kind of figured," she said. And Rose, sweet Rose, simply crawled into Marlene's lap and whispered, "Finally." That night, they built a fire in the backyard pit. Each of them threw something into the flames, scraps of paper, old fears, names they no longer needed. Talia tossed in a note she'd written years ago to her mother, "Why didn't you come back?" Jonah threw in a pair of worn-out shoes he had saved from the shelter. Micah let go of a crumpled photo that had scared him as much as it comforted him. And Marlene, she released the last piece of guilt she'd been carrying. A letter she had written to herself the day Linda died. "I couldn't save you," she'd written, "but I'll honor you every day." As the paper curled into smoke, she felt something lift. Later, huddled under blankets, they watched the stars blink back at them. "Do you think she sees us?" Rose asked. "I think she never stopped," Marlene said. It was a sacred winter, full of transformation. Not just because of the adoption, or the advocacy, or the rituals they had begun to keep, but because of how they had come to see each other. Not as survivors, but as a family. Spring came as a whisper, soft rains tapping on the windows, the hush of thawed earth beneath bare feet, and the cautious green of hope curling from the trees. After the long, sacred winter, the world outside began to stir, and so did the lives within Marlene's home. Change arrived gently, like it always should. With it came questions, those only asked once safety has rooted itself deep. "Do you think Mom is proud of us?" Talia asked one night, watching the rain trail down the glass. Marlene considered her words. "I think she's at peace. And I think she'd want you to live your lives without carrying her sadness." Talia nodded slowly, as if absorbing a truth she hadn't been ready for before. The children, now no longer merely coping, began to bloom. Jonah, ever the quiet observer, had filled his wall with photographs. But they weren't just snapshots of daily life anymore, they were stories. The crease in Talia's brow as she braided her hair. Micah's fingers stained with berry juice. Rose asleep in a patch of sunlight on the floor. He entered his first community art show that spring. His theme, "We Grew from Fire." The photographs drew attention, soft, intimate windows into survival. Into rebirth. A reporter from the local paper came to interview him. "How did you learn to see people like this?" she asked. Jonah shrugged. "You just have to love them enough." Marlene read that line 3 times in the article. Each time, it hit deeper. Meanwhile, Micah's curiosity with animals led to a part-time volunteer spot at the Wildlife Rescue Center. Every day after school, he biked there, rain or shine, helping feed orphaned owlets and clean the pens of stubborn raccoons. One evening, he came home cradling an injured baby rabbit in a blanket. "She's scared," he told Marlene. "But I think she'll be okay." He could have been talking about himself a year ago. Rose began to speak more, not all the time, but enough. She asked questions, sang softly, corrected Marlene's pronunciation when she attempted absolute words. And she smiled. Often. It was like watching a flower open one petal at a time. One afternoon, while painting together, Rose looked up and said, "When I grow up, I want to be a mom like you." Marlene's brush froze. She didn't answer right away. She just pulled Rose into a quiet hug, the kind that says everything without speaking. Talia, for her part, had changed the most. Her edge hadn't softened, but it had grown roots. She was finishing high school now, with grades strong enough to start applying to community colleges. But more than that, she was mentoring younger girls at the tribal center, many of whom had also lost parents, or floated in and out of foster care. "You know what they need most?" she told Marlene one day. "What?" "Someone who tells them they matter before they start acting like they don't." Marlene smiled. "Sounds like someone I know." Talia smirked. "Yeah, well, you helped." The sacredness of motherhood wasn't in the title or even the legal papers, it was in these moments. In seeing wounds turn to wisdom. In hearing laughter from rooms once filled with silence. That spring, Marlene began keeping a journal again. Not out of obligation, but as a way to hold on to the small miracles. March 12, Jonah called me Mom without thinking. I didn't even realize until hours later, and I cried in the laundry room. March 19, Micah asked what my favorite animal was. I said wolf. He said, "Makes sense. Wolves raise each other's young." April 2, Talia left a sticky note on the fridge that said, "Thanks for not giving up on us. Ever." April 21, Rose kissed my cheek and said goodnight. No words. Just that. Then, as if to mark the transition from one chapter to the next, Marlene received a call from the tribal court. A social worker asked if she'd be willing to speak at a summit about non-native guardians raising native children. "I'm not sure I'm the right person," Marlene said. "I'm not an expert. I'm just trying my best." "That's exactly why we want you," the woman replied. "You've done something sacred." The day of the summit, Marlene stood behind the podium, heart pounding. A room full of people waited, some tribal elders, others adoptive parents, social workers, educators. She cleared her throat. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "I was never supposed to be a mother," she began. "At least, that's what I believed. I wasn't chosen in the traditional way. I didn't carry them in my body. I carried them through fire. Through grief. Through silence. And eventually, through love." She paused, then added. "When I took in 4 children whose pain I could barely comprehend, I didn't know if I was doing the right thing. I just knew they needed someone. And maybe that's what motherhood really is. Not the title. Not the biology. But the choice, to stand in the gap, again and again, even when it hurts." There was a long, aching silence. Then the applause came. Later, a tribal elder approached her. He looked into her eyes and said, "You didn't steal from us. You honored us. You kept the fire burning." She wept, not because she needed validation, but because it meant she was no longer just an outsider doing her best. She was part of the circle now. That evening, she returned home to find the kids waiting, dinner on the stove, laughter in the air. Rose handed her a card. Inside, written in block letters by all 4. "Thank you for being our forever." She held the card to her chest, blinking back tears. Outside, the wind carried the first scent of lilacs. And inside, in the warm glow of the kitchen, a sacred story continued to unfold. Summer came with its golden breath and long, lingering days. The air was thick with the scent of wildflowers and cedar smoke, and the hills around the reservation buzzed with life. In this season of abundance, Marlene watched her children stretch into the fullness of who they were becoming, taller, wiser, louder in joy, deeper in thought. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were thriving. The house no longer felt like a borrowed space, it had become their place. Every corner held a memory now, Jonah's photos clipped to strings above the fireplace, Micah's animal sketches taped to the fridge, Rose's pinecone bowls doubling as makeshift fairy homes, Talia's shoes kicked near the door like she owned the earth beneath them. And perhaps she did. They all did now. That summer marked a turning point in their family's story, not a dramatic climax, but a quiet evolution. Like water smoothing stone. Marlene signed the papers for Talia's enrollment in a local community college, tears welling in her eyes as she passed the folder across the desk. "You'll be amazing," she whispered. Talia shrugged, but her grin betrayed her excitement. "I'm just glad I'm doing it my way." "What do you want to study?" Marlene asked. Talia looked out the window. "Social work, maybe. Maybe education. I want to make space for girls like me. Girls who are angry and quiet and brave and don't even know it yet." Marlene nodded. "That's sacred work, too." The younger kid spent more time outdoors that summer than inside. Micah became a fixture at the Wildlife Center and started leading weekend walks for younger children. He would point out tracks in the dirt, mimic bird calls, and tell stories he'd learned from tribal elders, about the hawk who guarded the sky, and the coyote who taught people how to laugh. Rose trailed him like a quiet shadow, her sketchbook always in hand. She'd sit near the river and draw for hours, capturing the way light danced on water or how wind bent tall grass. One afternoon, she brought Marlene a drawing, an image of their family as animals. A bear, a fox, a raven, a deer. And in the middle, a wolf, her arms stretched around them all. "That one's you," she said simply. Marlene looked at the picture for a long time. "Why a wolf?" "Because wolves raise each other's babies," Rose said. "And they never leave the pack." Jonah was growing into his own rhythm. He joined a local youth collective that used digital media to preserve indigenous stories. He was shy at first, camera behind his face like armor, but his talent was undeniable. He interviewed elders, filmed seasonal dances, created mini-documentaries about language and land. At the community center's summer showcase, one of Jonah's films played before a packed audience. It opened with a shot of the sky, then slowly panned to Talia's face, then Micah's hands holding a baby bird, then Rose smiling by a riverbank. Marlene's voice, recorded offhandedly during dinner one night, narrated over it all. "Family isn't who we come from. It's who we fight for. Who we grow with. Who we choose, over and over again." By the end, there were tears in more than a few eyes. Jonah didn't say much after the applause, just held Marlene's hand as they walked to the car. "Proud of you," she said. He squeezed her fingers. "I know." There were new traditions now, ones they had created, shaped by both heritage and heart. Friday evenings were for storytelling, not just old tribal tales, but family legends, too. Like the time Marlene burned dinner and they ended up picnicking in the living room. Or when they all got stuck in a storm during a hike and took shelter in a cave, telling jokes until the thunder passed. There were monthly dinners with Ramona and the tribal mentors, too. These evenings were rich with food and laughter, cultural rituals seamlessly woven into everyday joy. Micah learned to smudge the house with sage. Rose started using her absolute name again, Ashipu, meaning light from the river. Jonah wore a beaded bracelet he made himself, each color representing someone he loved. Talia drummed once, eyes closed, and said she felt like she was talking to the earth. One Saturday morning, Marlene took them all to the mountains. Just them. No cell phones. No distractions. They hiked until they reached a high ridge where the land stretched out like a prayer. "Sit," she said. "We're going to listen." "To what?" Micah asked. "To whatever speaks." They sat in silence for a long time. Birds called out. Wind moved through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a creek chuckled its secret song. Then Talia said, "I hear Mom." The others nodded. "She's proud," Rose whispered. "She says thank you," Micah added. Marlene didn't speak. Her throat was too tight. But she felt it too, that presence. Not as a ghost, but as a thread in the fabric of them. That evening, they built a small fire on the ridge and cooked bannock wrapped around sticks, laughing when they dropped one into the coals. They didn't talk about the past or the future. Just this moment. This flame. This family. When they packed up to leave, Marlene stayed back for one last look. The sun had dipped low, casting the world in amber. She closed her eyes. "I kept my promise," she whispered to the wind. "They're safe. They're growing. They're loved." And the wind answered, not in words, but in warmth. Like an embrace. As they drove home, Rose leaned against her shoulder and murmured, "We should come back here every year." "We will," Marlene said. "Always." Fall crept in like an old friend, unannounced and familiar. The leaves turned gold and rust, whispering their final secrets to the wind before letting go. The air held a crispness that reminded Marlene of both endings and beginnings, two truths that always walked side by side. In this season, everything seemed to slow down. The children returned to school, but with a steadiness that felt different from years past. Gone was the survival mode. Now there was intention, even confidence. Talia commuted to the community college 3 days a week and worked part-time at the tribal youth center the other 2. She came home tired but radiant, her eyes lit by purpose. "I get it now," she told Marlene one evening. "Why you fought so hard. It's not just about raising kids. It's about helping them raise themselves." Marlene smiled. "That's the heart of it." Jonah began taking portraits of tribal elders for a heritage series he was building with his youth collective. He printed the photos in black and white, capturing the lines in their faces like sacred maps. "I don't want people to forget," he told Marlene. "Their stories. Their faces. Their strength." "You're making history," she said. "Not just documenting it." Micah had taken to writing short stories, little fables about animals and people learning to live in harmony. One of his teachers shared them online, and soon he had an email from a local children's publisher asking if he'd be open to turning them into a book. "I thought you had to be grown up to be an author," he said. Marlene pulled him close. "Turns out you just have to be honest." And Rose, quiet, luminous Rose, had started learning traditional beading from one of Ramona's cousins. Her tiny fingers worked patiently, thread after thread, transforming bits of glass into stories you could wear. She gave Marlene a bracelet one evening, the colors vivid and deliberate. "What does it mean?" Marlene asked. Rose shrugged shyly. "It's you. Blue for the sky, white for your heart, red for your fire, and green for how you help things grow." Marlene wore it every day after that. Autumn brought ceremony too, one that honored the spirits of those who had passed, and those who had remained to carry on the legacy. The tribal center hosted a remembrance gathering under a canopy of stars, and for the first time, Marlene and the kids participated as a family. Each person brought an offering, a small token of remembrance, placed in a central fire circle to honor those who came before. Jonah laid a feather from one of the ravens he had photographed. Micah offered a page from one of his stories. Rose placed her sketch of the river, the one she drew the day she first called Marlene Mom. Talia carried a folded piece of her birth mother's shawl. And Marlene stepped forward with a simple, handwritten note. It read, "Thank you for the honor of loving your children." As the smoke rose, she felt Linda's spirit, not as a ghost of grief, but as a presence woven into the firelight. For so long, Marlene had wondered whether she was doing right by her. Whether love was enough. But in that moment, surrounded by laughter, by memory, by the breath of the land itself, she knew. She had done what Linda could not. And she had done it with reverence. The children danced that night. Not all at once, not in any choreographed way. Just small moments, Rose spinning with her beadwork jingling faintly, Micah stomping joyfully in rhythm with the drum, Jonah swaying beside his mentor, Talia standing still in the center, head bowed, as if feeling every beat in her bones. Marlene didn't dance. She just stood back, watching the four of them shimmer in the firelight like living prayers. Ramona came to stand beside her. "You've done something rare," she said quietly. Marlene kept her eyes on the kids. "I just showed up." "No," Ramona replied. "You stayed." "That's harder." They stood in silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. The days grew shorter after that, but the house was never dim. Marlene filled it with small rituals, Sunday soup, candlelight during homework, music playing in the kitchen. These were the ordinary sacred things, the kind that shape souls without anyone noticing. One evening, while folding laundry, she came across a notebook in Jonah's pile. Flipping through it, she found a series of poems. Most were rough, unfinished. But one stopped her. It was titled simply, "Mother." She read it aloud in a whisper. Not the first voice. But the one that stayed. Not the blood. But the breath between broken days. She stitched us back with hands made of fire. Held our stories like they were sacred choir. I do not remember the world before her. Only the one she made. Marlene sat there, the laundry forgotten, tears warming her cheeks. She had never needed a certificate, or praise, or proof. But this was everything. That night, she tucked each of them in like she always did, a tradition that hadn't faded with age. As she closed Rose's door, the youngest murmured, half asleep. "Thanks for being the kind of mom who never lets go." Marlene whispered back, "Thanks for being the kind of child who never let me forget why I stayed." Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing past the house with the hush of changing seasons. Leaves danced in spirals. Somewhere, an owl called. And inside, under the roof of that once strange house, love settled deeper than ever before. Not as an obligation. But as a way of life. Winter arrived quietly, like a breath drawn in before a prayer. Snow blanketed the hills and rooftops, softening the world into a hush. The children's laughter echoed against the frozen air as they built snowmen in the yard, their gloves soaked and their noses pink. Inside, the house radiated warmth, simmering stews, wool blankets draped across every couch, the faint smell of cedar and cinnamon lingering in every room. Marlene had always found winters hard. The stillness, the waiting, it reminded her of things she tried to forget. Her own childhood winters had been cold in a different way. But this year, something was different. The house didn't feel heavy. It felt full. They decorated together in early December, hanging strings of popcorn and paper feathers, mixing her old traditions with theirs. A dreamcatcher topped their tree, handmade by Rose and Micah. Instead of store-bought ornaments, they created small tributes to people and memories, a tiny camera for Jonah, a beaded circle for Talia, and a little wolf stitched from felt for Marlene. "It's not about presents," Talia said as she tied a ribbon around a basket of canned goods they were delivering to the community shelter. "It's about showing up." Marlene had never seen her so steady. They spent one evening writing cards, long, handwritten letters to people they loved. Micah wrote to his old caseworker. Rose wrote to her great-aunt in Arizona. Jonah wrote one to himself, a promise sealed and dated for the future. Talia, after some hesitation, wrote to Linda. She read it out loud at the kitchen table, voice low but unwavering. "I hated you for a long time. But now I understand. You were tired. And scared. I hope you're somewhere peaceful now. I hope you see how much I've grown. We are okay." Marlene made sure of it. No one spoke after she finished. Marlene reached for her hand, and Talia didn't pull away. On Christmas morning, they opened their gifts slowly. Most were handmade, drawings, bracelets, a knitted scarf from Ramona. Marlene gave each of them a photo album, the first she'd ever made, filled with pictures from the past 2 years. Talia flipped through hers and smiled. "You really caught the good days." "I caught all of them," Marlene said. "Even the hard ones. They matter too." In January, the adoption became final. It had been a long time coming, legally and emotionally. There had been court dates, paperwork, home visits. But the last signature was made quietly, in a wood-paneled office with the scent of coffee and rain in the air. "Do you want to change your last names?" the clerk asked. The kids looked at each other. Jonah answered first. "No. We already have our name. It's who we are. But we know who we belong to," Rose added, smiling at Marlene. As they walked out of the building, the rain had stopped. The sun was breaking through, making the wet pavement glisten like a promise. "Now it's real," Micah whispered. "It was real before," Marlene said, her voice catching. "But now the world knows it too." They went out to celebrate, not with balloons or cake, but with a long drive through the hills, ending at a high overlook that offered a view of the river winding like silver ribbon through the land. "It's all connected," Talia said softly. "This place. Our story. Everything." That night, they lit a fire in the backyard and passed around mugs of hot cider. They didn't talk much. Just watched the flames curl toward the stars. Jonah played soft music on a speaker. Micah leaned against Marlene's side. Rose curled up in a blanket beside them. Talia stood just outside the ring of firelight, looking up at the sky. "I used to think love had to be earned," she said suddenly. "But it doesn't. We just deserve it. All of us." Marlene nodded. "We do." And as the fire crackled and the cold kissed their cheeks, it hit her again, this wasn't just a chapter in her life. It was a sacred story unfolding in real time. The story of motherhood. Of transformation. Of chosen family. Of healing. Not the fast kind, but the kind that sticks. The kind that lasts. At one point, Jonah turned and asked, "Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this?" Marlene smiled. "No. I imagined broken pieces. But now I see it was always meant to become something whole." The moon rose higher. The stars blinked their quiet approval. And the house behind them, full of memory and promise, waited with open arms. They would go back inside soon. Back to books and school and grocery lists and laundry. The mundane magic of life. But in that moment, they simply existed. Together. Warmed by fire, stitched by love, stronger than the storms that had once nearly undone them. Marlene looked at each of them, her children, not by birth, but by everything else. And she whispered, "Thank you for choosing me." Micah leaned closer. "You didn't give up on us." "No," she said. "And I never will." Spring came like an exhale, slow and fragrant, with green pushing up through every patch of thawing earth. Snow melted from the mountain peaks and trickled down into the riverbeds. Wildflowers peeked from the soil as if testing whether it was safe to bloom. It was a season of becoming. And in that season, the house buzzed with change. Talia began her internship with the Tribal Youth Center, leading workshops on mental health and self-esteem. She spoke softly, but with the authority of someone who had lived what she was teaching. Girls leaned in to hear her. They saw themselves in her story, and in her resilience. One afternoon, Marlene visited during a session. She watched from the back of the room as Talia asked, "What would you say to the girl you used to be?" The circle went quiet. Then a voice answered, "I'd tell her she wasn't crazy." Another said, that she was brave, even when scared. And Talia added, "I'd tell her she was worth saving." Marlene left the building with tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Jonah had turned his photography into a part-time job, getting hired for events and community projects. But more than that, he had started teaching. On Saturdays, he hosted photo walks for kids, helping them see the world through a different lens. "It's not about the camera," he told one group. "It's about what you notice." His students captured clouds shaped like horses, graffiti that looked like ancestral patterns, a single red feather on gray pavement. Micah's book had been accepted by the publisher. His name in print. He held the proof copy in his hands like it was a newborn bird. "You wrote this," Marlene whispered as she hugged him. "I know," he said, in awe. "But I feel like it wrote me too." Rose was quieter these days, not out of sadness, but because her inner world had deepened. She took a part-time mentorship with a local artist who taught her how to create beadwork that told layered, living stories. Her hands moved like water, her eyes sharp with intention. One afternoon, she gave Marlene a new bracelet, this one wider, more intricate. "What's this one mean?" Marlene asked. Rose pointed to each symbol. "This is for our house. This one's for fire. This one's for the storm we survived. And this one," she said, pressing the center bead, "is the heart that held us all." Marlene blinked back tears. "You are the heart, too." She looked at all of them, her kids, and saw how they were expanding, into the world, into themselves. Each step forward they took was both a victory and a small ache. That's the strange thing about healing, it gives you roots and wings. As spring deepened, they began preparing for Jonah's graduation. The tribal school planned a special ceremony that wove traditional celebration with academic achievement. It wasn't just about finishing school, it was about stepping into adulthood with purpose. The night before, Jonah sat at the kitchen table, fidgeting with his shirt collar. "I don't like being the center of attention," he said. "You don't have to perform," Marlene said. "You just have to be." He nodded. "You'll be there, right?" "I wouldn't miss it." The ceremony was held outdoors, beneath a sky soft with clouds. Families filled rows of chairs, and a drum circle opened the event. Elders blessed the graduates with smudging and prayer. When Jonah's name was called, he stepped forward slowly. The wind caught the edges of his woven sash. He looked out at the crowd, his community, and then at Marlene, who smiled, her eyes glassy with emotion. Jonah took the mic. "I used to think I didn't belong anywhere," he began. "Then someone told me that belonging isn't about where you're from. It's about where you're loved." He paused, voice shaking. "I was given a second chance. And I plan to spend the rest of my life giving one to others." Applause rose like thunder. But Marlene only heard his voice. His truth. His healing. That night, they had dinner at home, spaghetti, Jonah's favorite, followed by blueberry pie. Talia toasted him with sparkling cider. Micah presented him with a framed version of his favorite photo. Rose handed him a sketch of their whole family at the river's edge. Jonah smiled and turned to Marlene. "This," he said, gesturing at the room, "this is the real diploma." She laughed. "You earned it." As the evening wound down, Jonah lingered at the table with her. "I was scared of what love meant," he said. "But you showed me it doesn't mean losing yourself. It means finding each other," she replied. Later that week, they cleaned out the garage to make space for a new workshop Micah and Rose wanted to share. As they sorted old boxes, Marlene found one filled with the kids' belongings from when they first arrived, photos, journals, broken toys, unopened letters. She sat on the floor and let the memories come. Not to relive the pain, but to honor the journey. Because this story was never just about saving them. It was about saving each other. They had stitched themselves together with patience, with truth, with the kind of love that stays. The door creaked open. Talia stepped inside, holding a tray with 2 mugs of tea. "You okay?" Marlene looked up. "I'm great." She stood and took the mug. Together, they walked into the sunlight streaming through the open garage. Spring winds carried laughter from the backyard, where Rose and Micah chased each other with paint on their hands. Jonah leaned against the fence, camera in hand, capturing it all. And in that moment, Marlene understood something profound. Motherhood wasn't a role. It was a vow. A sacred story passed from hand to hand, breath to breath. And she would carry it forward, always. Summer came blazing in, bright and alive, filling every corner of the valley with the scent of pine and wild sage. The river ran high from the mountain melt, and the children spent long afternoons wading through it, skipping stones and building small cairns on the banks. Marlene watched them from the porch, a book in hand, though she rarely turned the pages. She was too busy watching life unfold. The summer marked a milestone for all of them. Jonah prepared to leave for university. He'd been accepted into a journalism and media arts program 3 states away. The scholarship he'd earned covered nearly everything, but the thought of him leaving left a heavy tenderness in Marlene's chest. "Do you think I'm ready?" he asked her one night, lying in the grass beside her under a vast sprawl of stars. "I think you've been ready longer than you know," she replied. "But that doesn't mean it's easy." He was quiet for a while. "I used to think I'd never leave this place. That if I did, I'd forget where I came from." "You won't," she said, resting her hand on his shoulder. "Because who you are is rooted in this place. In us. In yourself." Rose and Micah had taken to planning a farewell mural for Jonah. They chose the back wall of the Tribal Youth Center, with permission. The mural would depict a river flowing through different scenes, stormy beginnings, quiet healing, vibrant future. At the center was a figure with a camera, walking forward. They worked in the heat of the afternoons, sweat on their brows and paint on their arms. It was their way of saying goodbye. Their way of thanking him. "He's like a big tree," Micah said, mixing a shade of deep green. "Now his seeds are blowing away to grow somewhere new." As the mural came to life, people in the community began stopping by to watch it unfold. Elders nodded with approval. Young kids asked if they could help. What began as a gift to Jonah turned into something bigger, a visual story of resilience and legacy. On Jonah's last day, the family threw a community potluck in his honor. The tribal hall buzzed with laughter, the air rich with the smell of fry bread, corn stew, grilled elk, and blackberry pie. Ramona stood and raised a toast. To a young man who took his pain and made it a lens to see the world more clearly. Everyone clapped, but Jonah looked down, cheeks flushed. Then Marlene stood. She held up a photo, one Jonah had taken 2 years before. It was blurry, not quite composed, showing the children laughing in a field. "This was the first photo he ever took with my old camera," she said. "It wasn't perfect. But he saw something in that moment worth keeping." She looked around the room. "Isn't that what all of us are trying to do? See the things worth keeping?" The truth is, Jonah saw us before we saw ourselves. And he taught us how to capture love before it disappears. There were tears then. Marlene could barely finish. Later that night, when the crowd had thinned and the stars had returned, Jonah hugged each sibling, long, lingering embraces that didn't need words. Rose clung the longest. "Don't forget us." "Never," he said. "You're part of my story now." Finally, he turned to Marlene. Neither of them spoke at first. She held his face in her hands, memorizing the curve of his jaw, the little scar by his eyebrow, the steady calm in his eyes. "You're my first goodbye," she whispered. He nodded. "And my forever hello." She gave him a small package. Inside was the original blurry photo, now framed, with a message written in the corner, the first of many truths. As he drove away the next morning, the others stood in the driveway waving. Marlene didn't wave. She just stood there, hand on her heart, knowing he'd carry that image with him always. Grief mixed with pride. That's the trick of motherhood, loving someone so fiercely that letting go feels like both a victory and a wound. The rest of the summer passed in golden, dreamy days. Talia finalized plans to transfer to a university in the fall as well, though she'd live at home for now. Her major: community health and policy. I want to make it better, she said. From the inside. Micah's book was officially published and sold out its first small run. He began planning a reading tour, with Rose designing the promotional artwork. They were becoming a team, quietly formidable. Marlene took them camping one weekend in late July. Just the three of them. They pitched a tent near the river, roasted marshmallows, and listened to the sounds of the forest. That night, Marlene lay in her sleeping bag, staring at the stars through the mesh roof. She remembered the first night she met them, scared, wild-eyed, strangers with old souls and broken hearts. Now they were whole. Not flawless, but whole. Thank you, she whispered to the trees, to the river, to the ancestors she felt in the rustling leaves. She thought of Linda, of the weight she'd carried and the love she'd tried to give in her own way. I hope you see them now, she whispered. I hope you know they made it. The wind blew softly through the pine trees, like a quiet yes. Marlene closed her eyes. In this moment, nothing was missing. They had survived the storm. They had built something sacred. And in the morning, they would rise again, together, ready for whatever the next chapter held. Autumn returned with golden leaves and the smell of wood smoke, like a gentle reminder that life, even in its change, always circles back. The air grew cooler. The days grew shorter. And with every leaf that fell, Marlene felt a shift, not just in the season, but in herself. The house had grown quieter since Jonah left. His absence echoed in subtle ways: the empty chair at the dinner table, the silence where his music once played, the missing click of his camera shutter on lazy Sunday mornings. But his presence lingered, too, woven into the walls, the routines, the hearts he helped mend. Marlene kept his room just as he'd left it. Sometimes, she'd sit on his bed and read one of his notes, tucked beneath the lamp, or trace the outline of a photo he had taped to the wall. Not out of sadness, but reverence. He wasn't gone. He was simply beginning elsewhere. And beginnings were everywhere. Talia started classes at the university nearby. She'd come home in the evenings tired but glowing, her backpack full of textbooks and highlighted pages. Her conversations with Marlene shifted, from guarded to open, from memory to vision. I want to start a wellness program, she said one night. One that blends traditional healing with modern support. We lose too many of our people in the spaces between. You'll do it, Marlene said without hesitation. You already are. Micah and Rose had turned the workshop into a living studio. They hosted youth art nights twice a month. Kids painted, sculpted, wrote stories. It became a haven for expression, a place where emotion had color and shape. One boy, no older than 8, painted his sadness as a tree struck by lightning. Another girl beaded a necklace in silence, her eyes heavy with something unspoken. But when she handed it to Marlene, she smiled. That was enough. They're telling their stories, Rose said softly. Like we did. One afternoon, Micah walked into the kitchen with a stack of papers. I got a letter from a school on the reservation, he said. They want me to visit and talk about my book. Marlene beamed. Of course they do. Your voice matters. He shifted, nervous. I want you to come with me. Me? You're part of the story too. She agreed. They drove out together a week later, just the two of them, tracing long stretches of highway that cut through land both forgotten and sacred. At the school, the children sat cross-legged on the floor, wide-eyed, listening as Micah read passages from his book. When he spoke about loss, they leaned in. When he spoke about hope, they nodded. And when he spoke about love, unearned, unconditional love, they looked to Marlene. She felt their gaze like a blessing. I'm not their birth mother, she said honestly. But I am their mother. Because I stayed. Because I chose to be. And in that moment, Marlene understood, motherhood wasn't about biology. It was about presence. About witnessing someone's growth, staying through their storms, and celebrating their dawn. The trip ended with a small ceremony. An elder gifted her a woven sash, dyed in shades of fire and sky. You carry our children's stories, he said. Now carry your own. Back home, the leaves had turned fully. Marlene raked them in the yard while Rose strung autumn garlands on the porch. Inside, Talia made stew. Micah added poems to the fridge door. The house pulsed with life. Then, one morning, an envelope arrived. It was from Jonah. Inside was a photo, crisp and breathtaking, a sunrise cresting over mountains Marlene had never seen. And on the back, a note. Still seeing beauty. Still seeing you in it. She pressed the card to her chest. Later that evening, as dusk painted the sky in bruised purples and soft gold, Marlene lit a candle in the window. Rose joined her. What's the candle for? She asked. For anyone finding their way home. Rose nodded. I like that. They stood there together, watching the flame dance against the glass. In the quiet, Marlene thought of all the stories within these walls, the laughter, the grief, the rage, the forgiveness. They weren't linear. They weren't neat. But they were sacred. Because they were lived. Because they were shared. And because, in the end, each story led back to love. Autumn whispered at the windows. The wind rustled through the trees. And Marlene, once alone and aching, now stood surrounded by the family she never planned, but always needed. She smiled at Rose. Let's keep the light on. Winter came again, not cruel this time, but contemplative. The valley settled into quiet. The trees stood bare and unashamed, their branches like open hands against the sky. The ground, covered in white, held memories beneath its surface. And in the house on the hill, life moved with intention. Marlene had begun writing. At first, just notes in a journal. Snippets of memory. Bits of dialogue she remembered between herself and the children. But eventually, those fragments became something more, a manuscript. A record of the sacred, imperfect journey of becoming a mother. Not by birth. But by bond. She never intended for anyone else to read it. But when Micah found the pages tucked beneath a stack of mail, he read them in silence, then placed them carefully on her desk with one sentence written on top. Your story deserves a voice, too. Encouraged by her children, Marlene submitted the manuscript anonymously to a regional essay competition on family and belonging. Months passed with no word. She nearly forgot about it. Until one morning, while shoveling snow off the porch, she got the call. She'd won. Not just an award, but a publishing opportunity, a platform to speak, not just about foster care, but about cultural trauma, chosen family, and the power of staying when it's hardest to stay. The announcement sent ripples through the community. Parents stopped her at the market. Teens wrote her letters. One note, left on the windshield of her car, simply said, "You made me believe family was still possible." She wept. The house began preparing for another departure, this time, Talia's. She'd been accepted into a dual-degree program out of state, combining community health with indigenous studies. It was everything she dreamed of, and yet, the thought of leaving stirred her. One snowy night, she stood in the doorway of her room, bags half-packed, eyes shining with tears. I don't know if I can do this. Marlene crossed the room and wrapped her in her arms. You can, she said. Because you already are. Talia buried her face in Marlene's shoulder. Promise you'll still be here. I'm not going anywhere. They stood like that for a long time. Micah and Rose stood at the edge of a new dream. They had been invited to co-curate a youth arts exhibit in the city, a full gallery space to showcase their mural work, storytelling, and poetry. They want us to speak at the opening, Rose said, barely believing it. You should, Marlene said. This is your voice, now echoing outward. Even with the changes, the house was never empty. Children came and went, nieces, cousins, foster kids Marlene mentored. The table always had one more seat. The stove always had a full pot. The stories never stopped. One day, while walking through the snow-covered trail behind the house, Marlene came upon a red-tailed hawk perched on a low branch. It watched her calmly. Then, without warning, it lifted off, powerful wings slicing through the sky. She stood there, breath rising like smoke, watching it soar. It felt like a sign. That night, she sat with Rose by the fire, flipping through a photo album Jonah had made the year before he left. It held pictures of their first winter together, the kids bundled in mismatched coats, snow angels in the yard, a blurry photo of Marlene, mid-laugh, holding a mug of cocoa. He said this was his favorite photo of you, Rose said. Why? You looked free. Marlene studied the image. It was a rare moment, unguarded, pure joy. She hadn't felt that way in a long time. But maybe it was time again. As the snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the earth in quiet wonder, she closed the album and looked around at her life. There was still so much to do. More stories to tell. More meals to cook. More tears to catch. More laughter to cradle. But she no longer felt buried by it. She felt called by it. The house had become more than a shelter, it was a hearth. A place where stories healed, where lost things were found, and where love, real and rugged, outlasted the cold. She looked at Rose, then toward the window where candlelight still flickered. You know, she said, I used to think saving you saved me. Rose tilted her head. And now? Now I think we saved each other. Rose smiled, wise beyond her years. We still are. And with that, they sat in silence, the kind that isn't empty, but full of everything that's ever mattered. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, a sacred story continued, written in warmth, in words, in the fire that never burned out. Spring returned like a whisper, softening the snow and warming the earth from within. Buds appeared along the trees outside Marlene's house, tiny bursts of color poking through thawed soil, as if the land itself was exhaling after a long, reflective silence. In many ways, Marlene's life mirrored the seasons. Her early days had been wintered, quiet, protective, cautious. But now, her days bloomed with intention. The house, though never loud, pulsed with life, with memory, and with a gentle rhythm shaped by love. On a breezy April morning, Marlene stood in the kitchen stirring honey into her tea when a knock came at the door. She opened it to find Jonah, taller, sharper, more sure of himself, yet still holding that same quiet sensitivity in his eyes. Surprise, he said, grinning. Marlene pulled him into an embrace so tight, neither of them spoke for a while. Behind him came Talia, bags in hand, having completed her semester early to work on a community health internship nearby. And a few hours later, Micah and Rose came in from the workshop, covered in paint and clay dust, stunned to see the full family under one roof again. That night, they gathered on the back porch. The stars returned, same as always, and the fire pit crackled with cedar and old stories. They laughed until they cried. They cried until they laughed again. At one point, Marlene stepped inside and returned with a new object, a hand-bound book, its cover made of reclaimed leather, its pages filled with her writing. I wasn't going to share this yet, she said. But I think it's time. She passed it to Jonah, who opened the first page and read the dedication aloud. To the children who made me a mother. To the stories that made us a family. To the sacred things that grow in broken places. They were quiet after that. Each of them held pieces of that story. Each had lived it. And now it was documented, not for accolades or approval, but because some stories deserve to be remembered. Later, As the fire died down and the night settled in, Rose asked, "Do you think we'll always be like this? Together?" Marlene looked around, taking in the glow of firelight on their faces, their journeys still unfolding, their hearts still learning. "I think love like this doesn't end," she said softly. "It changes shape. It travels far. But it always finds its way back." Micah leaned in. "Like a circle?" "Exactly," she nodded. "Like a circle." As they began to drift off to bed, Talia to her room, Jonah to the guest space, Rose and Micah lingering with art supplies and open sketchbooks, Marlene sat alone for a moment longer. She looked at the candle in the window, still lit, same as it had been every night. She thought of the first time she'd met them, wary, scarred, unsure. She thought of Linda, their biological mother, whose own light had dimmed too soon, yet who had, in her own broken way, started something beautiful. Marlene had often wondered if Linda could see them now. In her heart, she believed she did. Because healing, like motherhood, isn't always visible. It's in the meals made without asking. The hugs held longer than expected. The stories told around fires. The letters sent from afar. The courage to stay. It's in the choice to love, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. The next morning, Marlene rose early, the scent of spring filling the air. She brewed coffee, set out bread and jam, and watched as one by one, the kids, grown but still hers, emerged from their rooms, yawning and stretching. There was no chaos. No drama. Just warmth. Just family. Later that day, they all went into town together, attending a cultural celebration at the tribal center where Micah's artwork was now permanently installed, where Talia spoke on youth wellness, where Jonah captured moments through his lens, and where Rose helped children create tiny mosaic mirrors as part of an identity art project. Marlene stood in the background for much of it, content to watch. She no longer needed to be the center of the story. She had passed the torch. But the flame had started with her. That evening, as they returned home, tired but joyful, she looked up at the stars once again. A hawk soared above, circling high. And she smiled. Because now, she understood what it meant to be sacred. It wasn't a title. It wasn't even a role. It was a life, fully given, freely chosen, tenderly lived. It was the story she had been born to tell. And every chapter, every child, every quiet night with a candle in the window, had brought her to this place. Home. And now, dear viewer, take a breath. Let the story linger, not as a chapter closed, but as a light gently flickering within you. Maybe you saw yourself in Marlene, in the ache of beginning again, or the quiet strength of staying when others would have walked away. Maybe you felt the children's journey, that sacred unraveling of grief into belonging. Maybe, just maybe, this reminded you of someone you've loved, or lost, or learned to hold close. Stories like this aren't rare. They live in neighborhoods, in kitchens, in foster homes and tribal communities, in the silent resilience of those who've suffered and still choose love. What Marlene found wasn't just a family. She found the courage to mother without condition, to listen without fixing, to hold space for healing, and to become a bridge between lives that, by all odds, weren't meant to intersect. And yet, they did. They intertwined. And they transformed. If you carry anything from this sacred story, let it be this. Family is not always who you're born to, it's who you walk with, who you fight for, and who you choose again and again, even when the path is difficult. Keep the light on. Keep the stories alive. Keep becoming. Because somewhere out there, someone may be walking toward your door, in need of a place to belong. And when they knock, may you be brave enough to answer.